So
Got it.
yeah, we live in an age where graduate students come into the university and they might have studied very well individual courses. They're professional students now. They know how to take a test and learn material of science that other people have discovered, but they're not really well trained in how to generate knowledge themselves. They're not trained in how to uh, use the creative side of the process. And so, just like when students come in and they learn statistics and they learn ethics, we think there should also be a course called process. And the course on process tells them what we expect them to be able to do, right? To think of new ideas. No one actually teaches you that, uh, do they, Martin?
No, and just from my personal experience, it took me a very long time to discover that I could actually have myself scientific creativity. Like for a long time, I was just collaborating with people and working on questions that other people gave to me until I discovered that actually I can find my own questions and I can um, figure out what I'm interested in and what could be the answers to the questions that I want to answer, and the questions that I want to ask. So I wish, and I think the same is true for many people that we talk to, I wish that there would have been a course like this when I was a PhD student or a postdoc. But there wasn't. And so we think now it's time to make that happen.
And we think, just as an aside, we think the reason why, you might ask, why is there no course like this? Some people have said in the hallways to us one on one, they say, between you and me, you can't teach this stuff. You either have it or you don't. You're either creative or you're not. It's this mysterious thing. It comes from above, maybe. And we think that's just crap. We think whatever level of creativity you're at, you can always get better. I mean, like, what is creativity really? It's just a bunch of tools. It's a bunch of tricks. And if you learn these tricks and if you practice them, then just like a person doing lots of push-ups, they'll get muscles. If you use these thinking tools lots, you'll just become more creative. And you have to do it habitually, all the time, every day, and that's what it is. There's no really big secret.
Yeah. Isai, shall we get started with, we prepared some slides,
Of course.
even if we would really like to be this session a two-way street, right? So we're really interested also in your input, in hearing about, what do you struggle with when you think about teaching these kind of things, or what ideas do you have in addition to the things that we're telling you?
Right. So the goal of today is this. First, we'll give a little bit of an introduction to what we mean when we say the creative scientific process. Then we'll tell you about how we've been teaching it. And we think if you ask us like what our secret agenda is, our secret agenda is that it won't just be us that do this, because we're getting a little bit tired of there's only so much we can do as just two people, and we really need sort of help. This if this is going to catch on, it's going to be not just us two. So we want to with you provide you with the material that you can do it yourself, and so that's our goal for today.
So if any of you is woken up in the middle of the night and somebody asks, quick, what is the method of science? How does it work? I'm sure you can give an answer. And probably your answer will be something along these lines. You start with a problem, then you have a hypothesis that could solve your problem. You test the hypothesis, and maybe the test says the hypothesis can't be fully right, and then you have to modify the hypothesis until the test says, yes, I can't disprove that hypothesis, and then you have an answer. And that's, this very simple process of hypothesis and testing is what made science so successful.
Absolutely. This is what I like to say separates us from the animals is that we have the scientific method. We can do controlled experiments. Do you ever see birds in the wild do controlled double-blind experiments? Of course not. Uh, as Martin said at the beginning, I have a degree in the philosophy of science, so I could tell you about the philosopher Karl Popper. Fortunately, he's the only philosopher that scientists do know of. If they only know of one philosopher of science, they know of Karl Popper because he actually said something very interesting and very useful, which is that what we should be trying to do when we have a hypothesis is to prove it to be wrong. Why? Because you can't actually prove anything to be right. Induction doesn't actually work. And so you should be having ideas and then trying to falsify them. That's the quintessential backbone of the scientific method, falsification. However, when Karl Popper was asked, okay, but where do you get that idea? That thing that you're going to try to falsify, where do you actually get that? He said, oh no, that I have nothing to say about that. And so it leads one to wonder, how does the scientific process actually work?
And somebody who described that very vividly from his own experience was Francois Jacob, the discoverer of the principles of gene regulation, who got a Nobel Prize that he shared for that. And he says science in the works has two aspects, what could be called day science and night science. And that's what he talks about in his autobiography. And Itai, do you want to do the night science part?
Yeah, I think uh, the image that Jacob had of science is that the confusion is crucial. That part where you don't know what's happening, where you're having a nightmare, thinking about it, dreaming about it, that's just as much a part of the scientific method as the day science falsification that Popper talked about. And he wrote quite eloquently, night science wanders blind. It hesitates, stumbles, recoils, sweats, wakes with a start because you're dreaming, you're in the night, doubting everything. It is forever trying to find itself, to question itself, to pull itself back together. Night science is a sort of workshop of the possible where what will become the building material of science is worked out. So in Jacob's very, very eloquent way of putting it, there are two parts to science. There's, yes, the hypothesis testing. It's crucial to teach these to students, but we already do teach that to students. What we fail to teach right now is the night science part, that part of ideation, of coming up with what will become the building material of science in the first place.
And so the actual scientific method has this dichotomy between the two phases that you constantly switch between. The day science, where you test your hypothesis, where you put on your lab coat, maybe you take your pipette or your measuring instruments, and you actually, very rigorously and strictly, you test ideas, you perform experiments, you analyze data. But the thing is that if you're in this day science area, you're very confined, right? There's not a lot of room where you can move. Maybe you can slightly modify your experiment, but you're not going to get some totally different idea. And to get that new idea, you have to move up into the night science area. And in night science, anything is allowed, right? You can do whatever. You can use analogies. You can use free associations, right? It doesn't have to be logical. You just have to find that idea. And once you have an idea that you think is worth testing, you can move back into day science and see, is that idea compatible with reality? But you need that freedom in order to come up with an idea. So you need those two very different sides of science in order to be a full scientist.
You absolutely need that freedom because, I've been thinking lately about Jorge Luis Borges's idea of the library of Babel. Do you know about this story? He imagined a library that has every possible book. Imagine this library of every possible book. So I like to think of day science as the world of every possible experiment. Imagine every possible experiment you could do. Like, how vast is that world? Can you traverse that world? No way. It's just too big. So what you need to do is pop out of that, be in this realm, the night science realm, where you can make connections. You have super speed to go around and go to vastly different areas of that land of experiments. And then when you know what you want to do, then you pop back in and do the right experiment. But you need that way to transcend the vast realm
Yeah.
of possible experiments.
Yeah, and some people think that actually the night science part is the most fun part of science, right?
Absolutely.
This trying to figure something out, trying to get an idea, trying to understand something that you don't yet understand. That's a large part of what makes science fun, and it's also an important part of making science successful. And this dichotomy, this distinction between day and night, is probably something that you'll find in any kind of human activity that requires creativity. For example, in music, there's day music where somebody like Lady Gaga would be on a stage and perform a song, but the song is already there and it's being performed according to rules, and there's an arrangement, and everybody knows what to play and what to do on the stage. That's day music. But then at some point, she had to actually come up with the melody. She had to come up with the lyrics. She had to even figure out, what do I want to express and how I'm going to express it. What analogies are going to be there in my song. All these things you could call night music. And you have the same thing for art. Day art would be sitting in front of the canvas and actually painting, putting your strokes on the canvas. But before you can do that, you have to think about, what do I want to express with my painting? And what should be the composition? What should be on there? And what is the style in which I want to draw it? And that's night art. So this distinction between the night part and the day part, you have everywhere. And we named our work on the creative process, we named that night science in honor of François Jacot. But really, it's something that every scientist does all the time, regardless of whether you call it night science or not, right? If you want to be a full scientist, you have to have that creative side. And it doesn't have to be during the day and during the night. Maybe for somebody like Jacot, it was like that. But, you can do day science during the night and night science during the day, or you can do both during the night or both during the day, whatever way you want. It's really just to emphasize that it's two sides of this process that are complementary and that require each other.
Absolutely. And so, to complement what we said initially, if you're woken up in the middle of the night and you're asked, what is the scientific method? Yes, you say that there's a problem, you have a hypothesis, and you test it. That's day science hypothesis testing. And we teach that well. But what we also need to teach is what is crucial to get to the problem in the first place. Many of us know that in the progress that we appreciate the most and the breakthroughs that have really made an impact on our fields, it's the people that have come up with a new way of framing a question. Those are the works that have really made a difference. And so it's getting to the question requires a lot of creativity, a lot of night science thinking. And this is the part that that Martin and I feel we can teach a lot better, that there are thinking tools that can help us with this. And it's simply not true that it cannot be taught.
And so we're very excited that all of you are here today, we believe, because you're thinking about doing some kind of teaching of the creative process. And, very few people are teaching that at the moment, but it's something that everybody needs to learn. So it's awesome if at your institution, you might possibly be the first person to formally teach that, and so that the people you teach don't have to just pick it up over years by just observing, what other scientists are doing.
Right. So what if,
So
oh yeah, sorry. Go on,
yeah,
go on.
no. So this is just an overview over the different aspects of the creative scientific process Itai and I have explored so far, and we're still in the process of producing more content, more other angles, more other aspects of night science. But that's an overview over what is currently there and what you can already teach if you want.
Right. So we've been making these available since 2019 in the journal Genome Biology. We've been publishing them piecemeal. So our intention is that each piece provides a thinking tool, something that sheds some light on an aspect of the creative process. And we've had a lot of fun putting these together. We're really grateful for Genome Biology. Traditionally, that journal publishes very different sorts of works, and here, if you go into these, they're very wild in many aspects. Like the one called Improvisational Science is a dialogue. It's really written as a dialogue, and there's discussions of Bob Dylan, and cartoons from the New Yorker make an appearance. So they're very kind of wild pieces, and we're very grateful for Genome Biology for indulging us. But I think true to form, these we're talking about the creative process, and so I think these pieces are sort of reflecting the spirit of the creative process, and this is how we've been creating the content. And as Martin said, we intend on producing more. At the moment, we think, if you were interested in putting together like a full course on this aspect, then this material would probably only account for half of what you would need. So it's not really full yet, but it's becoming full, and it's ever increasing.
Well, I think it depends, Itai, what you call a full course, right? Like, if you would want to teach it over a full semester with a session every week and an exercise every week, then maybe you would have to add some additional material. But you can teach a short course, for example,
That's
for
true.
PhD students
Yeah,
very
and
easily just based on these materials.
right, and you and I, we each teach courses at our institution. So at NYU, I teach a course called A Workshop on the Creative Scientific Process. It meets 8 times, 2 hours each. And if you consider that a full course, then yeah, that is a full course. Well, Martin, why don't we try to summarize the content at this point? We think we can do it with just one slide. This is
Well,
like,
this is just going to give you a very broad overview of the topics that we treat in much more detail in those editorials. And each line, each row in this matrix would be one session, either in a longer course or in a workshop. You would have like 1 hour sessions, for example, and each row here would be like that. And I would just try to summarize it in a few minutes, just so that you have an idea of what these contents are, in case you have not already been to one of our workshops, which of course would be awesome, or you haven't read, for example, the genome biology pieces.
you know what we could do? Why don't we act it out like we do in the workshop? And maybe Casper, can we ask you to choose, should Martin play day science or should I play day science?
I would like to see Martin play night science and you play day science, Itai.
Okay. Okay. So
Okay, so sorry about that, Itai.
No. There's no apology needed, because it's not as though we're trying to say that night science good, day science bad. They're both sides of the same coin. You need them both. They're very complementary. In fact, one entire session is about how they each overcome each other's liabilities. So let's get started. The overall point is, as Martin mentioned before, there are two parts to the scientific process. There's day science and night science. Day science is executive. It gets things done. It does the testing. It's a judge. Night science is the creative. It produces ideas. Okay. And it just to make this entertaining, I'm going to be playing the part of a conservative professor who kind of has this feeling that only day science is important. So I'm going to be a little bit accusatory, but it's only for fun and games. Okay, don't take it seriously. Okay, Martin. I hear you want to play the part of night science. Well, let me tell you something. What science is about is falsification. Science follows Popperian philosophy. We have to take an idea and we can't prove that it's true, so we try to falsify it, right? That's what makes science rigorous and is so beautiful and separates us from the animals, is that we can do controlled experiments where we can show unequivocally if something is right or wrong.
It's what
Martin,
Michael Strevens called.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's what Michael Strevens called the knowledge machine, right? And you're totally right, Itai. You're totally right. That's what makes science so powerful. But you said something very interesting. You said you take an idea and then blah blah blah, and the blah 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 is extremely important, right? That's the power of distinguishing bad ideas from good ideas. But you take an idea. Where do you get that idea, right? Like, does it fall from the sky? Do you pull it out of the ether? Does your muse whisper it into your ear?
Oh, ideas are cheap, Martin. Ideas are a dime a dozen.
Yeah, but it's the good ideas that you need. It's the ideas that you cannot falsify that we need, right? And those you have to find. And in order to find it, there is this improvisational process in science. And, one of the most powerful...
What do you think? You're like a jazz musician or something?
Exactly like a jazz musician. And one of the most powerful methods for scientific creativity is to talk with another scientist. I mean, ideally a science buddy, somebody you feel very comfortable with talking to, right? Somebody where you have no inhibition to say something that might sound stupid, right? Or that you don't even understand yourself and you can't say very precisely, right? The ability to talk to someone without inhibitions and to develop ideas is extremely important.
What do you mean talking? Like, you mean like just sitting around and drinking coffee? I don't want people drinking coffee. I want them to pipette things into other things and do some work, not just talk.
Yeah, but you're talking about robots, right? But they will, if they're just pipetting all day, they have no time to develop ideas. So yes, they need the coffee break. It's important. And during the coffee break, they have to use the yes and rule, which means they have to have an attitude that is open, right? That tries to help other people develop their ideas.
Yes, and well, you want them to just be like yes mans, like they just say yes to everything. They're just like you're talking about robots.
No, not saying yes to everything and stop there, but saying yes, that's an interesting thought. And how does it relate to, this observation that maybe you haven't read about, or maybe it has something to do with this other observation that seems to go in the same direction, right? It's helping people develop their ideas.
I do admit that
what's your goal?
What's my goal? Oh, sorry. Well, I think the goal in science is hypothesis testing. Do you know what happens, Martin? If I submit a grant and I say, I don't want to do hypothesis testing. I want to just do a fishing expedition. Do you know what will happen to my grant? My grant will be they won't even keep reading the next sentence. It will just be like, next. Science is about hypothesis testing. I'm in the United States. Not all of you on this call are in the United States. So I have to explain to you, hypothesis testing and science are synonyms in the United States. That's what science is like you have to be in hypothesis testing mode. If you don't have a hypothesis, if you can't even pretend to have a hypothesis, then it's not even science. It's you're just in Lady Gaga land, as you put it.
I mean, yes, we all agree how important hypothesis testing is, but you know, if somebody really says science is identical to hypothesis testing, it means that they don't understand science, which is very sad
Mm,
because you can only test hypotheses after you've generated them, right? And you generate hypotheses partly from looking at existing data, but partly from just putting things together in your head, right? And figuring things out. And this generation of ideas is crucial, right? If you don't generate hypotheses, there's nothing to test.
mm. Well, okay, you could try to generate hypotheses, but please, can you do it within the structure of the walls that we've put around you? You know, we've created this university where within it there's schools, and within the schools there's departments, and within this department there's a floor, and within the floor we put an office, and that's where you go. You go into that office and close the door. We just want you to be in your box. And when you go to a conference, please only go to a conference that is within your field. Never even dream about making interdisciplinary conferences. Never talk to people outside your field. What could possibly come from that? And when you write a grant, please only submit it to your study section. And when you write a paper, please only send it to the very specific journal in your field. You know why? There's a good reason for that, Martin. It makes things efficient, right? I know you might think I'm saying this in a funny way, and I don't really mean it, but it does make things efficient, and you know that, right? You don't have to explain the assumptions in your grant, and when you write a paper, everybody in your reviewers sort of know what you're talking about. So it makes sense to create these disciplines and live by them, and that should be your fate in the scientific world.
Well, I know that you like to be in your little box, right? And you'd like to know everything in very, very tiny detail
Yeah, I
that
want to be
goes
the
on in your
expert,
little box.
an expert
And
of
it's
that.
important. Hmm?
Yeah, I want to be the expert.
Yeah, oh yes, and you totally are the expert. It's just that, you know, really the boundaries of those boxes, of those disciplines, they're arbitrary, right? They're just one way of clustering knowledge. But there's an infinite number of alternative ways that could have been used for clustering things. And the assumption that some new insight in your field will come from within that little box, you know, in many cases is actually wrong. In many cases, the insights come from combining knowledge between different boxes, between different disciplines, between fields. And you can do that by being in your box and importing ideas from somewhere else, right? Importing ideas from other fields, from other disciplines, importing experimental methods from other fields, for example, to answer questions in your field. But on the other hand, you can, of course, also take great ideas from your field and apply them elsewhere to export ideas. And this import and export of ideas is a very, very important driver of discoveries.
Absolutely. And you know, as has been noted in the chats, I want to respond to it. Of course, I'm kind of oversimplifying things when I say please stay in your box, but I think we do have to be mindful of the momentum of the way science is built, that there really is a lot of momentum that tries to keep us, if you're a physicist, to keep you from talking to biologists. There are these I think very real boundaries that we need to realize are preventing crosstalk. So Martin, though, when you talk about painting, or when you talk about tasting wine, you can use flowery languages. You can say the wine is fruit forward, and you could use kinds of analogies. But when you're talking science, we want to use precise language. And you know, precise language is crucial in the methods section. For example, when someone will need to be able to reproduce your work, we need to say exactly what was done, and instead of saying the cells looked unhappy after 5 days with the drug, we We have to say what was it about them? It was maybe the size of their nucleus increased, things that are precise. And so I really don't appreciate that sometimes you use this metaphorical language, and I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's the language of science.
It certainly isn't the language of data science. If you want to test a hypothesis, you have to be very precise in what exactly the hypothesis says, right? And what exactly the predictions are, and in what way you either falsify them or not. But in night science, it's totally different. In night science, there's no rule. In night science, you can do whatever you want, whatever helps you to be creative, whatever helps you to come up with a new idea. And a very powerful tool for coming up with ideas, coming up with new understanding, are analogies and metaphors. And maybe the most powerful of these are anthropomorphisms. When you talk about your cells, about your molecules, or whatever you're studying, when you talk about that as if it had intentions, when you take, as Dan Dennett would say, the intentional stance, right? And you ask, what is this protein trying to do in the cell, right? Or why is the cell doing something so stupid? And that's not a precise statement, but it's a statement that uses very powerful capacities in your brain that evolved exactly for that purpose, that evolved for the purpose of understanding the behavior of other humans. And you can use that to help you think also about other things. And then you have to translate back into precise language before you can actually test it in data science.
But Martin, what we scientists want is answers, right? Have you ever heard of reporters when they write these news pieces, they say scientists are looking for answers? That's what we scientists do, right? We want answers. We want them to be consistent. We want to say, does the vaccine work, right? Does the vaccine work? Let's do a clinical trial with control arms, and we will look for an effect that's in the test arm versus the control arm. That's how we design an experiment to get a consistent answer, Martin.
Yes. And, if you look at science teaching, it's often that, you're getting asked a question, right? And then you have to go off and find the answer to that question. And of course, it's a lot of what we do in science. But again, where did you get the question? Because often finding the question is the most important step in a discovery. Often new questions can form a completely new field of science. So a lot of the time, what scientists do is not actually finding answers to existing questions. It's actually finding new questions, finding new problems. And often you find these new questions and problems by observing contradictions in your data, or between your data and what is generally believed in the field.
Well, but Martin, in data science, we use deductive reasoning. Like we have a puzzle, right? We've defined this is the kind of puzzle that we're in. This is a logical puzzle, let's say. This is a jigsaw puzzle, let's say. This is this kind of, we're in this puzzle and we want to find the solution, right? We're using deductive reasoning, a classic hallmark of intelligent reasoning, to find the solution. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, a lot of the time that's what we're doing. And if somebody gives you a question or somebody gives you a puzzle to solve, then typically you understand what kind of puzzle you're in, right? Like, for example, it could be a jigsaw puzzle where you have pieces and you have all the pieces, you just need to see how they fit together. Or it's a logical puzzle, right? And if I just find, some logical rule here, I'll be able to give the answer. That's what if somebody gives you a puzzle, for example, for entertainment. But in science, we also solve puzzles, but often we don't actually know what kind of puzzle we're in, right? We might think it's a jigsaw puzzle. We might think we have all the pieces, But then we can't put them together. Maybe it's because they're from two different images, right? And we thought they're from one image. Or maybe it's not even a puzzle where we have all the pieces. Maybe some of the pieces are somewhere else. Maybe you have to import ideas from somewhere else to solve that puzzle. So in night science, we don't even know what puzzle we're in. And we have to constantly think about switching our perspective on what it is that we're trying to do.
I hear you. I hear you. But you know, Martin, when a graduate student first comes to the lab, I think a crucial thing to teach them at the beginning is experimental design of what they want to test. Like how do you construct an experiment? You need the positive controls, you need the negative controls. What are the replicates? Are you going to have the power to see the effect that you're looking for? And it's this kind of experimental design that forms such a crucial part of day science. It gives us this feeling of control, doesn't it? That we're controlling the way the project is going by designing the experiment the way we want it. It's very top down when the student first comes, isn't it?
Yes, this is how we write grant proposals, right? Like, this is the question or the hypothesis that we want to test, and then we have work package 1, and it's going to solve this part, and then work package 2, and it's all designed. And then we get the money, and we do it exactly like we wrote it. Not right, usually, right? Like, usually that's not what we do, right? So usually, by the time we get the money, we realize that actually what we should be doing is something slightly different. And then we start doing it, and then we realize it's going into a totally different direction. And the whole project evolves, right? We start with the illusion that we've designed it, but then actually we start doing it. And then from the bottom up, it evolves into something that we totally cannot predict at the beginning of this process.
Absolutely. By the way, there are beautiful comments in the chat. Keep them coming.
Yes. Yes, they are. I didn't have time to read all of it because I was in this conversation about day science and night science.
No, you did a
but I
great
saw there was
job.
some good stuff there.
Martin, you did a great job acting night science, I have to say. So I think that the point was that in night science, we're generating the ideas that are going to matriculate into day science testing. And you really do need both. And a complete scientist needs to have both. And so the training needs to include it. We've put together a website that tries to summarize everything we do. It could be more professionally done, we admit, but we are working scientists. We're not really designers, so sorry about that. But it does have links to all the editorials. There's a podcast that we won't mention much today, but we use it to widen the experiences that we have access to. Up until now, we've mostly talked about what we know, like how we experience doing science, what tricks help us. And when we say improvisational science helps, it's from firsthand experience. Martin and I, we talk, we've done projects together, and we know how crucial it is to talk through a problem. So we really do practice what we preach, and we really do write on the things that have worked for us. But then we started thinking, well, what works for other people? And so we've invited different people to speak with us. And that's been really illuminating. We thought we would just do a few episodes because everybody would just say the same things. And so we wouldn't need to go much further. But every person we bring on gives us the motivation to bring another person, because each person says something really new that we didn't think of. And that's been really wild just to see the variation and really the themes that have been coming up more and more are that this really is a kind of art. To do science is a kind of art. Like coming up with a new question, it's such a wild ride. And so there is this website. Yeah. Martin, please.
Yes, and what we also found, partly through the podcast, partly through just talking to people informally, is how personal this is, right? Like Itai was saying, everybody brings a different perspective, and it depends a lot on your personal preferences, on your personal taste. Like which of the tools you find useful, and which of the tools you like using, or which tools maybe you develop yourself. And so this, of course, makes the teaching a bit more difficult because it doesn't work exactly the same way for everybody. But there's a set of tools that many people use and that can be useful for everyone if they want to try them out. And one more thing I would like to emphasize is that, of course, Itai and I did not invent night science and the creative side of the scientific process. This is something that has been a part of science since its beginning, since its very beginning. But we're just trying to collect all the different tools and all the different insights into one coherent framework that we can then use for teaching.
Yeah. And so what happened is we were doing this, and one fine day we received an email from Stefan Pless from the University of Copenhagen. And he wrote to us and he said, hey, we're doing a departmental retreat. Would you guys be interested in coming and doing a workshop on this stuff that you've been writing about? And up until that email, that thought never occurred to us to actually teach this live. But we took him up on it, and we went over to Copenhagen. And this is a picture from that day, actually. And we had a great time. We found that it was we were so the students were so receptive to this. Like there was like a real genuine thirst to listen to this, and at the breaks and at the exercises, people kept coming up to us and they said, finally, someone is teaching us like what we're supposed to do here. Finally, people are teaching us like how this, like how come no one told us that you should have one-on-one discussions, that those are so helpful? How come no one told us that a great way to do science is to import ideas from other fields? How come no one told us this? And it's true, Martin and I were never told this. We each had to bumble around, bounce around and figure things out the hard way. It made perfect sense to teach it. And so one thing led to another. We got invitations to do this at multiple places, and by now it's becoming frankly a little bit exhausting, because every time we come over, and in Princeton University, for example, it was a 2-day affair. So Martin had to cross the Atlantic, and we went over, and we very happily did it. It was great. We even recorded it, and we'll be happy to share those tapes with you. But the feeling is that it shouldn't be just us two. Imagine that Martin and I came up with the idea of teaching statistics to grad students. And we would just be going around, be like, oh, how come no one teaches statistics to grad students? It's so great. Like, it would, at a certain point, we would say, there's nothing special about Martin and me. Like, anyone could do this, and anyone should do this, because grad students need to learn this. So that's how we feel about this, that it's really come to a time where we need to broaden this. These are tools that we didn't invent, as Martin said. Everybody knows this who's been in science long enough. So why don't we just teach it in an organized way, is the thinking.
Yeah. And I would actually like to also respond a bit more to a thing a couple of people said in the chat. And it's when Itai and I were playing out day science and night science, of course, we took the extreme positions for the purpose of illustrating this on the one hand, but also to emphasize that there's really this dichotomy, which doesn't mean that a lot of people in science, a lot of scientists will actually speak exactly like Itai was speaking when he was day science, or like I was speaking when I'm night science. Some people might, but that would be a minority, I guess.
Right.
Most people will be somewhere in a middle ground. But the very useful, I think the most useful thing that people should get away from our teaching is already that there is this dichotomy, that science really has these two sides, and these two sides play according to different rules. In day science, you have very clear rules. It's very clear how you have to falsify something and what counts as a falsification. In night science, there are no rules. In night science, you can do whatever you want, as long as there's an idea that you can then transform back into data science, right? So really just realizing that there's these two areas that we constantly switch between as scientists,
Right.
is already a very important step. So everybody is both data scientist and night scientist, but not at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a really important point to highlight, Martin, because what happens is day science speaking tends to overwhelm night science speaking. And so what happens if we're not careful is that we just do day science the whole time. Whenever there's some kind of competition, whenever, for example, let's say there's a grant, and the grant is all about explorations to come up with a new hypothesis, that grant will always look weak compared to a grant that's about hypothesis testing, right? Like when you try to compete them, day science will always win. And yet we all know night science is crucial. It's a crucial part to also have. And so the notion that we've tried to champion is that you should really distinguish between them. Like it's extremely useful to distinguish between these two worlds and keep them separated in order to defend the part that day science needs to play, right? In other words, you should say, okay, for this meeting, we're going to be in night science mode. I know we also have careful experiments to plan, but right now let's keep them separated. And it's this distinction. It's if you're mindful that there are these two aspects, then you could make sure that night science has a place to be. So here's oh yeah, sorry, you go.
No, whoever, it doesn't really matter. So this is just an example of how we have structured our workshops. So this is one from that we gave at the ETH in June of this year. And typically what we do, and this is just to give you an idea of how you could be teaching these topics, right? So typically what we do is we give an intro, like we did today, about, what do we mean by the creative process and this dichotomy between day science and night science, if you want to use those terms. And then we would talk about what we call improvisational science, about how you can talk in night science mode in order to help you to develop ideas, and that this is typically something that works best if you do it with just one other person, and that there are certain ways in which you should be talking in order to not suppress creativity in that context. So that's improvisational science. And we would talk about that for maybe 20 minutes, and then we would ask people to do an exercise. And we'll get to the exercise a bit later about what exactly we ask people to do. But it's always exercises that people do in pairs, right? Because that's how we think night science works best.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we teach it? How is it built? Martin just showed you.
Itai? Maybe we should just quickly go through the whole
you want to
agenda,
go through
right? Just
okay.
So okay, let me just continue that then. So that would be the first session. The second session would be about questions and contradictions, again with an exercise, then interdisciplinarity, again with an exercise, different ways of speaking, analogies, anthropomorphisms with an exercise, the relationship between data and hypotheses, and how hypotheses build on data and data builds on hypotheses, again with an exercise. And then the last session is sort of a bird's eye view of the scientific process, about how projects tend to evolve rather than to follow a designed course.
So, I mean, probably there are many ways to do this. And here we just want to report on how we've been doing it. So as Martin said, we took essentially each genome biology piece, each thinking tool, and we make it into a session. Each session has essentially 3 parts. The first part is stories and teachings. So we give anecdotes and we give the actual messages, and it's like a frontal lecture. It's Martin and I, we stand there. You'll see it in the video. we stand there and we talk it through, kind of like the way we've been talking it through now. Then there's the exercise. The exercise is crucial because that's when you actually can convince yourself that you're learning something, and the students like feel it on themselves. So it's crucial to do the exercise. Many times, we're invited to give talks on the night science thing, and it's just 1 hour. And so of course we forego the exercises. We just give this kind of a thing. And even in this like 2-hour session, we're not going to do exercises, obviously, which is kind of a shame because the exercises are a lot of fun. And our rule with the exercises are that we work in pairs. That's been amazingly well. Well, I guess we're going to talk about the exercises in a little bit later. So we'll tell you more about how we do that a little bit later. But then Martin and I, we demonstrate it. Then the students do it together. Okay, so that's the second part. And the third part is we come back and we review. We talk about what just happened. People have comments, people have questions, and exercising it, many things come up, and so we discuss them. And that's the overall way that we've set up the workshop. So I think that the key message is that it's very modular, right? Which means that you don't have to do it as a one-day workshop. You could just, let's say you have a group meeting with your students. You could just say, okay, as part of the group meeting, or maybe the entire group meeting, I'm going to do one session, not the entire workshop. Just pick one that you like the import-export, go through the material, and do the exercise. That's a perfectly reasonable way to use the material. And yeah, Martin, you want to say a little bit about this?
So,
meta slide.
like Ita said, these are actually the slides for one of our workshops. And you can see in gray, you can see where the different sessions start. And at the end of each session, there's the exercise. But really, this slide is just there to illustrate that there's a lot of material that you could be using if you wanted to teach along those lines, right? So if you want, you could just take all these slides and teach it, just take it as it's there and teach it like that. Or you could, of course, modify the slides to your own taste and add things, remove things that you're not so happy with. So there's a lot of flexibility of what you can do with these, but it's a great part. It's a great way to start your own teaching.
Martin, there's so many interesting, there's like a parallel session going on in the chat, which is really interesting. People are making really interesting observations. I just want to respond to a couple of them maybe. So
but you know what? Maybe if they're not directly related to what we're talking about now, maybe we should do this at the end of the session, that we just go through it and discuss these issues in a bit more depth.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah, well, as you wish.
I just kind of also want to encourage them to keep writing because it's so great. Maybe just
okay. No, then you're actually right. Then you should respond to it now.
Just one. Could there be, Ashish writes 3 messages up, could there be trainees, some who are better at day science, some who are better at night science, and an advisor's job is to hone the one which they are a little weak at? Sure. I think sure is the answer. Of course, everyone will have a different level that they excel at between these modes of thinking. And sure, the advisor's job is to hone in. It leads to a bigger question of, do we expect scientists to be good at everything? What is a perfect scientist? Is a perfect scientist one that is amazing at night science and amazing at day science? Wouldn't it be enough to just be amazing at night science?
Or at day science?
Or at day science? Isn't that be enough? I think that's a very interesting question. I can tell you just from my personal experience, just from where I'm sitting, I find it really rewarding to do both. I really do. I think it's great to have ideas, and then it's great to also test them, because when I test them, I realized, oh, I was wrong. And had I not tested them, I might have been left with the good idea that I thought was good, but it's actually not good. So in my mind, it really is an iterative process where you have the idea, then you test, which leads to more ideas. Like it really is a cycle. So for me, it's both. However, it doesn't have to be, and it's really interesting to debate whether maybe you could just be an amazing scientist at testing ideas that are sort of have already been proposed.
So if I can add to that, I think for the progress of science, you need both, right? You need excellent night science, you need excellent day science, but there's no reason why that should be in the same person, right? It could be, and maybe that's like you, Itai, maybe that's the way you love doing science. Or it could be that you're good at one of them, and then you pair up with somebody who's good at the other thing, and
Right.
then together you can do awesome science, right? Or you write papers about hypotheses, and then somebody picks them up and tests them in an ideal world, right? It could also work like that. So actually, I think the ideal mentor would help people to develop their talents, right? And if your talent is night science, then that's what you should develop. And you should probably also do some day science and learn that too, right? But really, you should do, if you want to be successful in science, you have to do something that you like doing. If you're not excited about what you're doing, it's not gonna be very good in the end. And so you have to figure out what is it that you like doing, and develop that.
Yes. Amen to that. So let's say you want to do this. Let's say you signed up to come to this session and you're curious, could you do this at your home institution? Well, there are lots of things that we're very happy to help. Obviously, we have a huge interest in having you do exactly that. That's why we're here, and we're happy to provide you with the recordings of us presenting at a workshop. This is us doing the workshop at Milan for the Young Investigator Program. They had their annual meeting, and we came for 2 days actually, half day, and you can. I think if you look at these recordings, you'll see that they really match very nicely the genome biology pieces, and so those are good resources for you. That should help you to get started.
Yes, and on the webpage for Night Science, nightscience.org, there's links to the genome biology pieces, but you can also just Google for genome biology, or if you Google Night Science collection, you will get the genome biology pieces too. And the slides for teaching you can also find on the webpage. And on the Dropbox, you will find the Milan tapes. But so, we're happy if we actually would be very happy if you would watch them, but please don't distribute them further. Because, one reason for not distributing them further is not that we want to keep this necessarily secret, but we've also recorded some nice videos from the workshop in Princeton, which are currently being edited and which will be much nicer for general sharing than these things that I just recorded with my phone while we were doing them. Now, actually, I want to follow Itai. I want to follow your tradition and respond to something in the chat. And somebody was saying, or asking if a night scientist, a pure night scientist, could actually survive in the funding landscape. And that's probably going to be difficult, right? So, if you can have a permanent collaboration, that would be a way to solve that problem. But otherwise, it's going to be hard, which is probably not the best thing for science, but it's just the current reality. And there was also a comment about that you need a strong foundation in the details of your scientific field before you can start becoming creative. And of course, that's true, right? Like, if you take a random person from the street who's not a scientist, they can be very creative about scientific questions, but it's not going to be extremely helpful for science because You need to know exactly, you need to have a very detailed representation of the current knowledge in order to understand where something interesting new could be, or to discover, to realize that a discovery is actually a discovery. So it's not that you don't need to know anything in order to do night science, but you don't necessarily need to do the experiments yourself in order to be a good night scientist.
Yeah. And also, I see a comment in the chat, starting PIs often get the advice of limiting collaboration and focusing on your own thing. Should we just ignore that advice? You know, I remember when I was a starting PI, everybody would give you advice. Everybody loves to give you advice. And Oscar Wilde used to say, I always pass on good advice because that's just about the only thing you could do with it. Yeah, everybody will give you advice all the time. You remember, Martin, when we talked with Galit on the podcast, she said that she was also given advice when she was writing this grant. Her
Yes.
chair and the deputy chair, they had a meeting with her, and they had her present her grant to them, aim 1, aim 2, aim 3, or as you Europeans call it, work package 1, work package 2. And
Yes.
they offered all kinds of advice. They said, well, why are you doing it like that? You should be doing it like this. This is you have to go in with these tools. You have to be more biochemistry needs to be used here. And she listened, and then they said, so are you going to take our advice? Are you going to do that? And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not who I am. That's not what I want to do. That's not what I'm interested in. You guys should do that, and I'll do my thing. And I think whatever advice people give you, you should really remember what you want to do and what's right for you. In other words, if you're always doing something because of the funding landscape and things like that, then I just worry that you might kind of lose yourself in the process, and that's not good. Having said all that, that's its own advice, isn't it? So feel free to ignore
Yes.
that. Yes, and the Dropbox.
Yes, and if I
Oh yeah, sorry, go on.
sorry, if I may just add to that, I think it's also important. You know, we have this term that we like to use, Itai and I, of the science buddy, right? So Itai is a science buddy for me, and it means just a collaboration partner that you really like working with and that you feel you can do very constructive work with. And you know, we wouldn't suggest that you should just collaborate with anybody, right? And that the more collaborations, the better. But if you find somebody you really like working with, you really like collaborating with on scientific projects, that's awesome, right? And you should do it.
Yes. The Dropbox folder is empty now. I don't know why I'm also typing it. I could just say it, but we're going to populate it right after this call. Right before we said, oh, we should give them a Dropbox link. So take the link, remember it. The stuff will be there very soon. Okay, so Martin, maybe you want to talk about the exercises. We feel the exercises are crucial.
The exercises, they are, as the slide says, a crucial part of the workshop. And you know, like basically anything you want to learn, you have to try it out. You have to work on it. Just hearing about it is not enough. And we actually like to put people into random pairs because it's a great experience to talk to somebody you're not talking to all the time, right? Like you're not going to talk about the same things you've already talked in the last coffee break. And you're going to get new perspectives. And of course, it's easier to explain your project to somebody who's working on something very closely related. But that's not the point, right? In night science, you just need somebody to give you ideas, right? And maybe that person cannot tell you exactly what you should do, but maybe they say something that gets you thinking. And so we think that talking to random people can be very valuable, right? Even if in the end you might find your science buddy and then do most of your scientific discussion with that person. And the other thing is that Itai and I believe that we shouldn't ask the students to do an exercise that we're not prepared to do ourselves, and also to show them, you know, what it might look like. We always provide a demonstration, so you know that they can see what the exercise would look like in real time.
Yeah,
And we
because
keep it a bit shorter than the original exercise, of course.
I mean, many times when students, particularly first year PhD students, they've never actually heard people talk science, right? They've heard people talk about studying science, like studying for a physics exam, right? They've heard people talk like that. They've engaged in that, but they've never actually heard what it's like to talk science. Like, hey, maybe it's like this. Oh, I heard about this method. Maybe we can apply it here. And wait, is that really the right question? They've never actually heard that. So to do a demonstration is extremely valuable. And sometimes people say to us that it's boring. Because what we do is we actually stand there for about 15, 20 minutes and we improvise a project. Or we take someone from the audience, some volunteer, and we do the exercise with them. And we actually do it. Like it's not scripted. Like we're actually live sciencing. And it requires some thinking, and it requires going back and forth and reverse in one step forward, two steps back. And to some, it might seem boring. And we just say to them, this is what science looks like. If it's boring, then okay, maybe you don't like this particular scientific topic, or maybe you just don't like science at all, maybe. But this is what it looks like. This is what science in the making actually is. And so I also want to respond to something that Tamara said in the chat. She wrote, "This is why I never understood why labs are started by only one PI instead of partner PIs, which could be so much more enriching and productive." I think that's a wonderful suggestion. And I do know of a couple of instances where it was two people that started a lab together, a joint lab. And probably a lot of people here can also think of some cases that they know. So it does happen, but it is rare. And at least in these exercises, we work in pairs. So working in pairs is a crucial part of the exercise. We actually like formally teach it in the first section called improvisational science, that there's so much good uses to not being in your own head. So it should be more than one person, but also not being with more than a pair, because if it's in a big group, you can get lost in the group. You could be quiet, or you could be dominant, and politics and groupthink arise. So working in a pair is really crucial. And Martin, let's give them an example of what is the first exercise.
Okay, so the first exercise, that's for scientific discussions, which we call improvisations. And the title of the exercise is, "What is your worst idea?" We put people into pairs, and then we ask them to try to improvise an extension of a project, right? So, you have your project, so, there's something you're doing, but maybe you have some idea that's related to your project that you're not currently doing, that would be a new direction. And maybe and it should be something that you find interesting, that you would like to do, but it could be something that may sound impossible, or may seem crazy to other people. But that's why we call it your worst idea, so that you have no inhibitions to state it, because then people will say, yeah, well, it's supposed to be the worst idea, so it's okay if it's crazy. But of course, people can also use their best idea. But that's just for the framing. And it's really to introduce people to consciously have a positive attitude in these night science discussions, right? We're like humans in general. We like to find faults in something that people tell us, right? We like to think about, why is this probably wrong? And we scientists are the worst at this game, right? Like we love that, right? We love to find why something people tell us is wrong. Right? It can't be like that. No. It's not like that.
But you must be wrong. You must
really,
be wrong.
If you want to develop an idea, you have to suppress that, right? You have to be positive and to try to find what could be positive, what could be interesting, what could be worth following up in whatever the other person said, right? And in this discussion, that's what people are supposed to practice.
Yeah.
So that's exercise 1.
And I find that when I do this exercise also with grad students, where it's just me and the grad student, and we just want to talk, I say, "What? Give me your worst idea." It's so much fun because it reduces the pressure, right? The grad student will, of course, say what they've been thinking about recently, which is their current best idea. Even though the topic is worst idea, they'll give me their best idea, which is great. But they'll be thinking, oh, he's going to think I'm so smart because that's my worst idea. And that's the whole point. By the way, this is an exercise that we took directly from Tina Selig at Stanford. She has an entrepreneurship workshop that she gives. And so, the entrepreneurship people, they've been teaching ideation for a long time. It's their business, right? To literally to come up with new ideas. And it's kind of striking that we scientists are so behind in this game. I think we can learn a lot from the work that the entrepreneurship people. So this is really directly taken from there. What's your worst idea? When we actually mean, what's your craziest, what's your best idea? Here's another one.
Yeah, Itai, you want to explain the second exercise?
Yeah, this is the hard one to explain. Well, so some of you may be familiar with Eric Lander from the Broad Institute. And we heard a story about Eric that in conversations with some people, he likes to say to them, like his kind of like one of his sentences, his trademark sentences is he'll say, like, Casper, what do you really want to know? What do you really want? So what his sentence is, what do you really want? And we added, what do you really want to know? And the idea is that when you're talking about a particular project, there's a reason why you're interested in that particular project. And it's interesting to dig in a little bit. Like, why are you interested in that? Because instead of going forward and looking for instances of testing that particular question, you may be able to generate adjacent possible neighboring questions that are just as interesting and may lead to a breakthrough. So if you just go one step up and realize, why are you interested in that? And then think back on that. I mean, it's actually really instructive to say, well, for example, if you're interested in cancer, like why specifically are you interested in cancer? And then you might realize, oh, you're interested in cancer because it's an evolutionary process, and there's something that just draws you as a person to thinking about evolutionary processes. Like you really understand it well, and you have the tools to study them. And you might say, okay, so given that cancer is an evolutionary process, and evolution is what you're really interested in, can you go forward and think, like, what else is an evolutionary process? And you might think, well, the immune system is also, right, the way we have an adaptive immune system, that's also an evolutionary process. And then you might think, this is not going to come out well because I'm just making this up, but like you might think, well, maybe like there's an adaptive process of the immune system and the adaptive process of cancer. So maybe we can think together how there's some kind of mutuality. Is that the word, mutuality? Mutualism?
Sounds like a word.
Like coevolution. And then, right, and you might generate these kinds of ideas. So that's the goal of this exercise. And the goal is really ambitious. It's to come up with a new question. If you generate a new question, that could be like your whole legacy, your whole scientific legacy, that you generated that question. So of course it's a big thing. So someone could say to us, Martin, Itai, are you guys really this naive that you think in this one simple exercise you can generate this career defining question? And our answer would be, look, it's like a muscle. You need to keep exercising it. Of course, you might fail now. Of course, you might fail the next 100 times. But if you keep exercising it, if you keep doing this, eventually you'll get to something. The whole point is not to get it in one fell swoop. There's no shortcut to this. It's just like a bodybuilder. You know, if you ask a bodybuilder, which push-up was it that gave you all this muscle? Which can you point to the push-up? And of course, it's not one push-up. It's all of the push-ups together. And it's the same thing with this. Like each exercise is pushing you forward. Anything to add, Martin, before we go to reviewer
No.
session 3? You could tell I'm
No,
dealing with
no,
reviewers.
no. I think you explained it well, which is not surprising because you came up with this. And I really like it. I
I
mean,
would say Eric Lander came up with it.
well, he didn't frame it as an exercise, but you're right. In a way, Eric Lander came up with this. And
Oh,
it's
this
so
is a-
difficult to
this is
come
a
up with
fun
new
one.
questions.
You explain this one. This one's fun.
Yes. So here, basically here, it's just an exercise in consciously using different languages when you're talking about day science, precise language, and night science, where you can use any language you want. And probably because of human evolution as a social animal, our brains are really, really good at thinking about the intentions and the possible actions of other people. And we can use these powers of our brains for scientific questions if we reframe questions in the terms that we would think about humans, right? So using night science language can be extremely useful in night science, but of course it doesn't make a lot of sense in day science. And so in this exercise, the idea is that one of the partners, let's say me, I explain my project to Itai first in day science language, very precise, no analogies. And then I try to explain the same project, but with much more freedom in the language that I'm allowed to be using, right? So I can explain it in analogies, I can use anthropomorphisms, I can talk, about why my cell is trying to do something or why it's not trying to do something. And then together we discuss the project in night science language and try to come up with new questions. And if we stumble upon something we find interesting, we'll try to translate it back into precise day science language. So it's really an exercise of consciously using these different types of languages.
Sorry, Martin. I just something went wrong for me.
No, it's okay. I'm done with what I wanted to say about that slide anyway,
Oh.
about that exercise.
Yeah, my bad. I did you would think I would know how to do Zoom by now. So Martin, do you want to respond to something from the chat? There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah, but a lot of it builds on previous contributions to the chat that I missed. So
Oh no.
I'm not really sure what I can contribute right now without carefully going through the whole chat.
Well, it might be useful to stop and take some questions, or we can keep going like this. I see we have 40 more minutes. So
yes. Well, I think we should explain the other two exercises because doing exercises is a very important part of teaching night science.
Yes.
And
So
then I think we prepared some ideas about how one could start actually teaching these things. And
Right.
so we're briefly going to talk about that. And after that, I think we're going to have time for
Yeah,
more
so-
open discussion with our participants.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the open discussion. Okay, so there's other exercises. We could go through them one by one, but I suggest to save some time, we'll share these slides with you, of course, and they're also on the Milan tapes, the video tapes, so you can actually see us acting it out. And let's keep going with the notion of a thought experiment. So here's a thought experiment. Emma, I know that you organized a night science day, and Casper, I know that you're interested in toying with the idea of maybe organizing a night science day. What would it look like? Well, what would you need to do? Well, there's the material that we provide, and of course you can add your own material, but we have stuff to get you going, and it's the genome biology pieces. There are slides, there are the clips of us doing it. It's ours, we warn you. There's a handout that we'll tell you about. Who would present it? It could be maybe a colleague also does it with you. It's a lot of fun when Martin and I do it together, as you can tell. And so think about that. You would add your own material, like I mentioned. What would you need for it? You could do it virtual, but we found, and we have actually done it virtual a few times, Martin and I, and we have plans to do it in the future, but we found that doing it live is awesome. So you would just need like a seminar room and a place where people can go outside to do the exercises, preferably outside. Also, they could actually stay in the seminar room and do it there if they have to. We also always have a whiteboard. That's how we do the exercises. For the exercises, as Martin said, we never ask anyone to do something that we ourselves wouldn't do. And in fact, we demonstrate doing it. That's really key. Recently, on Monday, I did the workshop here at NYU for our incoming 40 PhD students. It was a lot of fun. And Martin wasn't here because Martin at that same day was doing the workshop in Berlin to students. So as you can see, we're getting really tired doing these workshops. But who did the demonstration with me? Well, I invited 4 colleagues, 4 different professors, and each exercise they came and I said, you don't know anything in advance, just come, no background, no prep work. And one of them had to cancel at the last minute. So I needed to find someone else. So I just went back to the lab and I said, whoever I see first, I just grab and they come with me. and I saw a graduate student, Ayushi Patel, and poor Ayushi, she just came back from India, so she was jet lagged as hell. And but she was a real courageous person. She came down. So she's a PhD student. And she did the exercise with me in front of the PhD students. And that turned out to be really good because the students said that seeing another student do it was very, what's the word? Very encouraging for them, very instructive, because the student is, of course, like them. It's part of their peer group. So that's something to consider, doing the exercises with either, Martin, say what you did.
Well, I just asked for a volunteer because, when Ita and I teach together, we do the exercise together. But, if you're lucky, then somebody from the audience will just volunteer for doing this. But it's always good to have a backup, right? To already have asked somebody before that if nobody would sign up for this, that they would actually do it. But I think it's definitely good if it's someone from the peer group, from somebody on the same level as the majority of your audience.
Yes.
Itai, do you want to say something about the handout?
Yeah, so we've been doing this for a while, and every time we do it, we like to have what we call an innovation. So it doesn't become boring for us. We always add something new. So the whole thing has been evolving, and let's tell you about a couple of innovations. One is to give out a handout. So the participants get a physical thing, and after they do the exercise, see here, it says what the exercise is. And we will put this in the Dropbox so you have access to it. And they take notes, and also the partner makes notes on what they discussed. Another innovation that I actually did on Monday that I was really happy with, it's a very long day for the students. And the students, one kind of negative feedback that we get is that it's a very exhausting day. They're really tired. I find it amusing that that's a bad thing. But the students really are working. And the innovation this time that I think made it easier is that I added games. So like, especially before the last session where they're like really tired and they're like, oh my God, one more session, my brain's about to blow up. We played this half-hour game called Majority Rules. And everybody got so into it, and they're like, they're laughing and they're crying from laughter because it's such a fun game. And then I say one more session, and then they're happy doing it. So that's an innovation. What's another other innovations that we've done, Martin?
Well, I mean, all the innovations become integrated into what we do. So,
Yeah,
like,
think
what?
it was. Oh, usually to have a dinner afterwards is a lot of fun to reflect on it. And someone told us that the workshop should be done at night, as befitting the name. But I don't know. Okay, so Martin, you do this.
Yes. So, there's of course different ways in which you can teach scientific creativity. Generally, we believe it's good if you give people some input, something that you could call a lecture, or that you tell them about the background of and the tools. But it's crucial to also do the exercises. And one way of doing this, of course, is to have something like an inverted classroom where people watch the tapes, either the ones that are on the Dropbox, even if we don't really want them to be distributed then further, right? But if you give them to a few students to watch, that's fine. Or then later, if we have some nicer tapes from the Princeton workshop, then those. So you could let the students watch the tapes and then discuss it with them and do the exercises. But of course, it might be more fun if you actually do the lectures yourself. You can do this either as a course, and it will not be over a full semester, but maybe over half a semester. So you have one session every week, or you could do a one-day workshop, or you could insert part of the material into some course that you may already be teaching, right? Like, because many of you will do some teaching anyway. And if there's some good excuse to add something about scientific creativity, and usually, for many courses, it makes sense to talk about these things, then you can just insert, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 lectures about these topics with matching exercises. Or you could just do the exercises, like Itai said before, during your group meetings or during a retreat of your lab or of your department.
And you might be asking yourself, if I do this, am I too presumptuous? Like, who am I to teach this? Like, my colleagues are going to think that I'm showing off. My colleagues are going to think that I think I'm the smartest person. That's a real I think obstacle to overcome. And we're interested in what you have to say about this. Like, is this a real concern, do you think? And by the way, feel free to unmute and speak if you so choose. Or write in the chat. So I can tell you just from my experience, I did feel this. I don't feel it anymore. I also used to have the imposter syndrome. I don't really have it anymore. I think it's a kind of thing that you feel and then you overcome. It's you feel it and then you don't feel it. So it's fine to feel it. We all do, of course. And I think it's going to require a degree of courage, but it also, I think, can be ameliorated by the way you frame it. If you frame it as saying, look, there are these guys, Martin and Itai, and I think they're onto something. Maybe we do need to teach this, and then you say it's maybe the way to think about it is the same way I think about giving a talk. Before I give a talk, I'm like really nervous. I'm always nervous before I have to give a presentation. And the way I overcome it is I say to myself, Itai, don't be so egocentric. Like, just don't think about yourself. Like, if you're nervous right now, it's all like me. Just think about them. Just think about they came, they're sitting there, they want to hear something interesting. If you're going to be nervous, then you're just going to, make them not hear something interesting. So think about them. So I think in this case also, don't think about yourself. think about the students. Like the students, they need to learn this stuff. They need it. So, okay, maybe some colleagues that are a little bit close-minded will think that you're presumptuous. Fine. The students will value it. The students need it. Do it for them.
Itai, if I can add,
Sure.
I think it's very nice that you bring it up because I think you're right. All of us will feel it. And from doing this once, I
Yeah.
was also nervous about exactly that, but it only lasted for 5 minutes until we got into it and everyone was happy to open that door. So it was a very
Good.
short, yeah,
That's good.
short.
How to maybe say a little bit more. How did you do it?
We did a short one, which was a little bit more than half a day, which was also maybe a way to get into it for ourselves. And I did it together with a postdoc who's also keen on understanding more about it. And it was we went to a nicer place than the normal lab. It was
Mhm.
within the group. So in that sense, maybe that I couldn't think of the students choosing to be there because they're part of my lab, so they kind of have to. So in that sense, I kind of force fed them too, which was part of my sort of nervousness before that. But and then we were in a nicer place and we had coffee and all that stuff, so it gets a little bit different from the regular routine.
Mm.
And we followed your slides with a few of them, cutting some of it away, and we did 2 or 3 exercises, but that was the first time, of course. So one of them failed completely, where we were going to do the, start somewhere random for the worst idea related to cancer. That just got to be a nutcase exercise. But otherwise than that, then the exercises were fantastic, and we had these walks talks about, when we do the anthropomorphic
Mm.
discussion about each and everyone's and I could even see that some of the more maybe constrained team members could really loosen up and talk about their project in a much more night science way. My challenge since then has been how to implement it further on, how to keep the exercises alive during the semester. So I liked your 5th point on a previous slide on maybe take one of these exercises now and then in group meetings. Is that something that you've had experience with? Works?
Yeah, we have this thing in group meetings called it's a play on the game Musical Chairs. You know this game Musical Chairs? So we call it musical chairs is when you have like 10 chairs, if there are 11 participants and they all go around, and when the music stops, everyone needs to find a chair. Whoever doesn't find
okay.
So we have musical pairs, and musical pairs, the way you play it is, well, I'll give you the motivation. So we're in a group meeting, and we have this tradition of doing a round table. Once a month, we do a round table where instead of just one person presenting, we go around the room sort of, and each person says about where they are in their project, what's new, just a short update. Maybe they want to brainstorm with the group. But then the thing I was sad about is that it's, again, one person talking and everybody else is being quiet. So how can you get more people to be engaged? So what we do is just, and we didn't mention this, but it's a crucial part. You might say, how do people get into pairs? Like when we do the exercise, who chooses the pairs? Do we let the students choose the pairs? No, they're just going to choose their friends, and we can't have that. They need to, we don't want them to have the same old conversation. We want something new. It's also a great way for people to get out of their existing contacts and make new friends. The way we do it is random. We use like a random numbering generating pairing. And the same thing we do in this musical pairs, we generate pairs. And so they have to talk to one other person in the group. And I think, if let's say you have a group meeting that's 2 hours, what we do sometimes is the first 20 minutes is you just get into a random pair, and it's 20 minutes because, and we do it on the clock. We put a timer for 10 minutes, and the first 10 minutes is one person in the pair talks about something that they're interested in right now. And then the clock beeps and you do it the other way. And then that's it. You just go and you start the meeting. And I think it answers your question, because your question, if I understand it correctly, is how do we keep it going? Like, let's say we do a 1-day workshop.
Mm.
Is that it? Or is there one way to keep the momentum, to make it into like a habit? So I think if we could find a way to do it like once a week, even if it's something small, it keeps it going.
Yeah. I think that could be it's exactly my question, because otherwise I can see that we have a tendency falling back into the routine and just talking about the data and where subconsciously the anthropomorphisms and stuff is sort of filtered away. But if we can keep that language and keep that door open with an exercise like that in the beginning of a group meeting, I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and some people
so maybe you or anybody else in the audience, maybe you have other ideas, or you will come up with new ideas of how one could keep that momentum and what kind of exercise one could do, and we would love to hear about those things. I would also like to add something to the original point, Itai, that you were addressing, and the question whether it could be seen as presumptuous if somebody teaches such a workshop. And I don't think I'm as far as Itai in terms of having fully lost my imposter syndrome. But I really don't think I'm the most creative person in the universe. And, I don't think I'm particularly creative. It's just that I think it's a very fascinating topic. And I think it's a topic that we have to talk about. And we have to consciously deal with, and we have to teach people about. And if you're the only person teaching creativity to students in a formal setting at your university, it doesn't mean that you think you're the most creative person in the department. It just means that you're the person who took it upon them to talk to students about this, right? And if you frame it like that when you propose teaching such a course, I don't think anybody should object to that.
So Tamara, you wrote, I can, although I haven't really structured it yet. Well, jump in at any time, or I'll talk about it. Tamara writes that maybe the podcast episodes provide an interesting opportunity to do a kind of journal club that focuses on night science.
Hi.
Hey, Tamara.
Hi everyone. I kind of like started following you guys through the podcast basically, and I found it super interesting, and it was the first thing that made me think about night science as something that had actually like a name properly. I thought about, I always wanted to have like a journal club kind of thing, and we tried it with some postdocs at the institute, but it's very hard to promote like attendance, I guess. Like people are very busy and students have a lot to read and a lot to learn, so it's very hard to really.
True. People are busy, and night science is always the first to go.
Yeah, and it was hard to think about how to approach it in a more creative way, instead of like talking about a topic that was in like a paper or a book or something. So I feel like podcasts, since I guess that they are easier to follow while you're doing something else too, and they can provide like an idea that just pops up in your head and you can like take a note or whatever. It could be fun to have a journal club that is based on, have you heard the podcast this week, and what do you think, and what was the best like phrase that you got from that, or the best idea that you got from that, and that could like lead to, I don't know, 45 minutes or whatever of like a talk or something, like very kind of lunch thing or something like that you would sit around with people and really discuss it. Because I feel like very much like I'm the only one that sometimes knows these little things that are like available, like these podcasts and stuff, and I share that with the students, and they have no idea that it exists, and it's like also fun to like share and to like sit down and have someone to discuss it with.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think when people say journal clubs, I think that's the domain of day science, because what is a journal club is you choose a paper and you meet to destroy it, right? That's what a journal club ends up usually being. In other words, day science rules the journal club. And I always thought it would be great to do the complementary. I mean, I think it's great to have that kind of day science journal club because you learn like critical thinking, day science, crucial skill. But complementarily, you could have like what you're suggesting, a night science journal club, or you take a paper and you say, this is so cool. How can we expand upon that? What ideas does that give us? And you're just with a board, and if you frame it as a night science journal club, then people come and they have a different attitude. The only thing that makes me pause a little bit is, and you know, we do that, by the way, at NYU. I organize these no slides, only whiteboard sessions. One thing though that Martin and I stress is that working in pairs is great. And so maybe like a big session, sometimes you like it does have its limitations. But of course, everything has a limitation that some people can just be quiet and not be as active. And so, I don't know, just something to think about, that there's also magic of doing it in pairs. But maybe that could be done with a journal club. Like you meet to discuss like the thing, and then within that journal club, you get into pairs. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Sumaya has a great suggestion here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's something that Itai and I have also been talking about in the past, that there, you know, basically for every paper that's being published, there should be behind the scenes or the making of version of that paper somewhere, so that you could actually follow the true development of the project, which is totally different from the way it's written up, the way the story is being told in the formal paper. Typically,
That would be
right?
so much fun. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, Sumaya.
Yeah,
If I can quickly add, like I think Nature Microbiology has a behind the paper
oh really?
behind the paper article that you can write about your own paper if you publish in that journal. I wish more journals did that. I've been thinking of doing that as like almost mandatory, blog post that say my lab members would do about their own papers, and it would be available on the website so that they can write about their story, the way it came about. But like if just more of that exists, I think somebody just said, so Babak said nature group journals in general do this, but I think just generalizing that, basically make it as a blog post for your lab group or for your department would be really cool. And you would have to talk about the night science, day science. We went down this path and everything crashed and burned, so we decided to like completely
you don't have to
change
go
our
through this
direction.
path.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, Martin, talk about what you were saying the other day to me about the diary.
Yeah, because I think a problem with this idea is that if you try to reconstruct that after you wrote the paper, right? Like, how did it start? And you try to remember, you're going to remember some things, but especially the things that failed, you might not even remember. So I think to properly do this, you would have to keep a kind of diary over the course of the project. And then at the end, you can go back and say, oh yeah, that's what I did at the beginning. How stupid, right? Now you realize that there was no chance that would lead anywhere. But, and of course, so it's not in the paper, but that's how it all started.
Oh, Mohit wrote something interesting. Mohit, should I read it or do you want to talk about it?
Sure, I can briefly talk about it. Hi. So I teach a science communication course. I started last semester, and there students play improvisation games. So these are not the ones that you described, but based on think there is an imaginary ball that they are passing on to each other. It's more about them to get to respond in real time. And then we discuss how when we give talks, we are going back to what Itai was saying. We just keep thinking about me as the speaker and not really think about the perspective of an audience. So to try to tell them that when they make errors in these games, as the complexity of the game increases, that's equivalent to the cognitive load that they are taking with them on the stage. That, well, I have to give a good talk, I have to try to remember the outline, etc. So the whole semester, we basically try to realize that slides are visual aids, but we are not the slides visual aids. So we played various different games where You said, okay, you come prepared with the talk, but then the projector is not working. How do you improvise in that situation and still communicate your message as effectively as you could in a given time? So yeah, thank you so much once again for doing this
No,
for
no, oh
all
my
the
God,
workshops.
definitely. And you've just inspired me to leave these slides because they're just blocking the conversation. There's another question here. I have to hide so few. There's another question here, though, of when is the right time to teach this material to students? Should you teach it to postdocs or just advanced students in the PhD? Because maybe first they need to do the day science learning of how to design an experiment in the first place. Or why not start exercising this muscle right away for first year PhD students? I'm of the opinion that I used to think that, oh, maybe first year PhD students, it's too early for them, that they're not even stuck yet. They're still in like the very happy period where they imagine everything is gonna go according to plan, and it's too soon. And maybe it's better to introduce it in like the second or third year. But I think I've actually changed my mind, and I think the answer is to teach it late and early and in the middle, to teach it all the time. It's not like a one-time thing. Kind of going back to what we were saying with Emma, there's no, the key is momentum. The key is to keep it going all the time. So I think if you teach it right at the beginning and then try to make it into a habit that they sustain, I think that's the way forward. What do you guys think?
Yes, I would love that to also evolve the thinking myself, because I think that's why I don't have the momentum yet. It's not ingrained in me this language is not natural yet. It is, of course, on one-on-one discussions, but not in the leadership role. So
yeah, it's really interesting, and I think the way the way Tamara said it, she said that it's good that there's a name for it, right? That now we know it's called night science. Of course, there's many other names we could have called it, like lateral thinking, like yin yang, like type 1 thinking, like context of discovery. There's different people have realized that it's so useful to make this distinction, and there really is a vacuum where we don't know how to teach it yet. And so I actually think it's a very exciting time that we can improve things. We can do better science with this, and maybe for some of us, the way to get started is just locally, grassroots, with our own people at lab meetings. Like that could be something like tangible with our colleagues, with our friends. Start small. I think that the smallest step is actually also so big, because the smallest step would be to just write to a colleague and say, hey, do you want to go for coffee? And then talk science at that coffee. That's a huge step, I think. And it's amazing to me how few of us actually do it.
I have a question.
Yeah,
If you can
Casper.
So, yes, it seems possible that you should be able to improve the creative process. But how would we measure that? If we have a course for students, like how would we know if we're successful? Could we evaluate exercise number 1 versus exercise number 2? Can we have some like day science measurements on night science improvements?
Yeah, it's something that Itai and I have been talking about and thinking about for a long time, obviously, because we're scientists. So, we shouldn't just say, oh, you have to do this. It's obviously good. We would like to measure that, to test the hypothesis that actually it helps to be conscious of the night science process and of the tools you can use. But, these things are, of course, very difficult to measure. I mean, we've talked to people who have more experience with these kind of things, and one recommendation they do is self-assessment, right? You can ask the people, do they feel that now they're more creative? And you can ask them again after a year, whether they felt this made any difference or not. But of course, that's not a very unbiased way of assessing that. And really, you should do a controlled experiment where you randomly put people into a group that learns about night science formally and a group that doesn't, and then you track them over the course of their PhD, and you count the number of citations they get for their papers or how disruptive their papers are. But it's not something we've implemented, and I don't think it's something that you can do very easily. But if anybody has good ideas of how to do this, we'd be very grateful.
Yeah, tell us how to do it. We have to figure this out.
I have a thought about it.
Oh, hey, Judith.
So
how are
ever
you?
since, hi,
Cool.
good. I actually have a thought about it because I teach a class. I'm planning to try and slip a few of these exercises into a course that I teach on writing. And I actually teach 2 courses, one back to back, so different students, but at the same time in the same semester. And one of the things that occurred to me is that if you put a survey at the end of the semester and then maybe the following semester about which parts of the course made the most difference for you, and have really been impactful in how you're doing your science, and not leading it on with what is it, do you like the night science part? And I don't even know that I'm going to call it night science.
No,
but
you don't need to.
Just learning which parts of it are most helpful. And what I've found in the past is that I teach writing, and there's a lot of mechanistic things, but I also do an awful lot of philosophizing and talking about how science works and why things are impactful and stuff
Right.
like that. It's not really part of how you write. And they always comment that part is the part that was the most useful for them because nobody taught it to them before.
Yeah.
So I think that some kind of survey like that might be useful, where you don't feed them what they have to feed back to you, but just free writing about what was the most useful.
I think that's a beautiful day science experiment you're proposing. It's
Yeah,
I would be really curious to know the results. Yeah.
So I also have one other thought that I just wanted to put out there, and it was too long to start typing it, which is I've been thinking a lot about gray thinking and about not having black and white, but actually gray. And I'm wondering whether night and day is really not fair, because what's really very useful is to be able to drift into the night and drift back and then pull on the day in order to do things by integrating between the black and the white. And so there's a lot of material out there about mature thinking being gray, being able to accept the gray zone. And actually, I think a lot of creative thinking is about being in the gray zone and just sort of being able to hold it, being able to hold the uncertainty of it in order to let something new come to you and then test it. And so I just want to put that out there as something that I'm thinking about, and I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about it. And thank you for doing this. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Judith. It's absolutely a fiction. This notion of day science and night science, it's just a human construct. It's absolutely not real. The motivation, and I think Martin mentioned this earlier, that we were creating extremes to make a point. The extremes were just there to demarcate the axis, that there is this spectrum of now we could be very highly detailed and very focused, and here we could be more zoned out, and thinking about ways to make connections. So it's kind of like a spectrum. And so I definitely agree with you that there's a gray zone. The point that we think needs to be made is that in the absence of recognizing this axis, we all tend to be overly on this side, overly on the day science side, and there's no future in that, right? Because it's the night science that creates new ideas. So we need to be well balanced, and by you talking about gray, that to me suggests a balance naturally. So I think you're more advanced. You're kind of in my mind, you're already you know, you already took on the idea that you totally agree with the idea that there's extremes, and you want to have both worlds, and I totally agree with that. Martin, do you want to?
Maybe I can add to that. I don't think it really is fictions that there are these two areas. Of course, there's a lot of gray zone, but if you think about formal scientific communications, I mean, like Michael Strevens said in his book, any scientific argument can only be settled by empirical data, and that's really all there is to, you know, how science works, you know, formally. And so I think the idealized paper, which is just about using empirical data as argument, that's pure data science, right? The idealized paper. And in reality, we often slip a little bit of night science into our papers, but I think this extreme of day science does exist. And I think there are extreme moments of night science where we're just totally floating and improvising and associating things. But a lot of the time, of course, and that's true, we are in this gray zone. So in that respect, I agree.
I was thinking sometimes, I don't know, tell me if this is totally off, but that if you go all the way to the extreme of night science, you're really in philosophy. Like that's the realm of philosophy, is night science. And if you go all the way to the extreme of the other side, the day science, then you're really in the realm of engineering. And we scientists, we're in the middle. Like we take the best of both worlds. I love our job that we have to have the big ideas too from philosophy, but we can also test them like engineers. And we need both. It's both kinds of thinking that push the thinking forward. So we're coming up to the end. I think we will follow up with you in an email to remind you of the Dropbox link and all the material. Let us know if you have any comments. We really, I mean, this is so fun to hear from you guys, people that I hear through Twitter and other means. It's nice to, you know, put faces to names like this. And I think like Emma says, we need ways to not make this a one-off and keep this community going. So thank you very much for joining us today. And Martin, please say something more.
Also from me, thank you very much. It's very exciting to us that there are so many people who at least think about teaching this and who might potentially be teaching part of these things at their institutions. And, you know, like we hope, like we said, we hope that this is going to be something that will become obvious maybe in 10 or 20 years, right? That, of course, this is part of graduate education.
Yeah. And, you know, I have to say one more thing. In the chat, you guys were all practicing the yes and. Everybody has been so supportive, and it's wonderful to see this kind of environment. You know, we're just all connected, and most of us don't know each other, and this is a wonderful community that we're forming. So yes and. Exactly,
Yes.
guys. All right, we'll let you go. And have a good rest of your day wherever you are. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I'll stop the recording, I think.
I think you can safely.